All right, and we are recording. Good morning, everybody, again. Thanks for being here. It's a little bit funny to me that I've become a person who loves and knows a decent amount about LinkedIn. You just never know what's going to become meaningful. And as I learn LinkedIn, I got to tell you, I like it more and more. And so I'm starting to, I think, evangelize a little bit because it doesn't, certainly every form of social media. Welcome, Alice. Every
Hey,
form of social media has its own version of ick. I mean, that's just sort of the nature of the beast. But I find less ick and more professionalism on LinkedIn, and I do find it to be a very valuable tool for positioning ourselves and beginning and deepening relationships that can be pretty meaningful to us. Let me pause there for 1 second. I should have asked you this before I started recording, but is my sound okay? This is a new headset. Okay, fantastic.
Good.
Thank you. The perpetual search for a headset I like. So I'm going to just start with my sort of number one rule and thought about how we approach LinkedIn in terms of presenting ourselves. So, of course, there's a couple of sides of LinkedIn. So there's the how are we presenting ourselves and how are people seeing us? And then there's the flip side of who are we finding, how are we approaching them, and how are we making that interaction meaningful? And so I think it's important that we first start with the how are we presenting ourselves so that when we're creating connections with other people and we're trying to build and deepen relationships with people, that we're well represented on LinkedIn. And in fact, I decided to host this class. I don't know if you saw this in the original email, but I decided to do this because I woke up one morning with this aha about how I wanted to update my LinkedIn. I knew it was a little outdated and I wanted to tweak it a little bit. I knew I could feel more fully like I was representing myself better on LinkedIn, but I hadn't quite wrapped my head around how I wanted to do it. And then I woke up one morning and I was like, oh, I've got it. And I sat down at, 4:30 in the morning, whatever time it was, and just got the draft going and hopped online and got it updated. And so I hope you'll take a minute to look at that and see what you think. I'd love any feedback. But my sort of number one rule or analogy or thought, I guess, about how we represent ourselves on LinkedIn, and this is true for resumes as well, is to take an approach more like writing a memoir than like writing an autobiography. So an autobiography, I'm sure you've all read some of each kind of writing. And so an autobiography is like, Sarah B. Ross was born on this date at this hospital. Her mom is Cheryl Greenberg. There she is. Hi. And her dad is David Kaplan, da 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 da, right? And she weighed this much and she went to this elementary school and da da da, right? All the details. We're getting really deep and really comprehensive in an autobiography. And we often want to approach our LinkedIn profiles in that way. We're like, look at all the things I did. And I used to have that I worked at a bread store in college on there because I'm like, maybe somebody will find that really quirky and amusing. And it was a great job. It's not relevant. Okay. It's not relevant to the work that I do now, at least not in an outward way, in a way that people would look at it and go, oh, she worked at a bread store in college. Of course, she's now the coach I want to work with. It's not the story. And that's what we get with a memoir. With a memoir, we get a more crafted story. And so what we're saying in a memoir is more like, here's Sarah B. Roz's journey of learning to make the perfect baguette and how it relates to, her relationship with tradition and family and patience or whatever. I don't know how to make a perfect baguette. I don't even eat bread anymore. But the point being, it's a crafted story, right? And there's a lot of things that I'm going to leave out of that memoir. If I'm writing this memoir of learning to bake bread and how it shaped me as a person. And so the question that I think is valuable to ask ourselves when we're creating this sort of professional documentation, so I don't like earbuds, but so pardon my fidgeting. But I think the thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what is the story that I want to be telling people? And how does that relate to what I'm creating as a professional? So everybody on this call today is running their own business, Each of us is in a different phase of startup. But I happen to know all of you, so I happen to know that's true for all of us. But for anybody watching the recording who's more on the job search side, it's still relevant. Whether it's that you're focused on the types of clients you're trying to bring in, or whether you're trying to focus on the type of role that you want to fill, there's still a story that we're telling about where we're going and how what we've already done contributes to that, to telling the story of why we're the right person for that thing, why we're the right person for that job, or why we're the right person for that client. So when you think about the story that you want to tell, do you have clarity of that story? Do you know who you're talking to? And do you know what you want them to know about you? Or even more importantly, what they might find valuable, which sometimes is a different thing, right? Sometimes we have this like, I want you to know this and this and this about me, and this is how I do my things. Like Charlie is a professional photographer. He can say, I want people to know I use this type of camera and I use this type of photo editing software, and I really like these kinds of lenses because it really makes people look great in their portraits. Most people getting their portrait taken don't want to know all those things, right? What do they want to know, Charlie? Can I put you on the spot?
Sure. They just want to know that the photograph's going to look good. They couldn't care less how you arrive at that point.
Yes. And why do they want the photograph to look good?
Told them anyway.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's not our language, right? They're not looking to learn all about photography. And so why do they want the photographs to look good? What are they going for? Let's say I saw your post on LinkedIn a moment ago about good LinkedIn profile pictures. So what's that about?
Well, one of the better pieces of feedback I got several years ago when I did a person's headshot was that it gave him more confidence because he knew he looked good on his website, on LinkedIn, on other social media. I mean, I know professionals, and I look at them on Facebook, and I call them up or send them an email saying, hey, isn't it about time? So that you look like an insurance agent, so that you look like a realtor who actually sells real estate as opposed to just dabbling at it on Sundays at open houses.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important, and there's all kinds of research to back me up that your headshot needs to, if you're going to put it out there on a business card, billboard, that sort of thing, needs to reflect the kind of work you do. So, a good example would be a banker needs a totally different one than Sarah B does. Okay. If you're in a creative profession, you can be a little more, I'm going to say, whimsical. But if you're going to try to sell somebody financial services, you need to immediately build trust and credibility and look like a financial professional.
Absolutely.
And that's been going on for decades. I mean, I guess it was Malloy's Dress for Success, which came out in the early 80s, late 70s. Always talked about you need to look like you're successful at what you do, because nobody really wants to do business with an unsuccessful person in what you do.
Right.
Go ahead.
If I may sort of jump in on that point, because I think that we're in an age right now where there's a lot of variety and flexibility about what that means. So we have 4 coaches in this room today, Alice, Carol, and Dr. Greenberg. Right. And each of us have very different, we have different personalities, we have different target markets, we have different approaches to coaching. And so the way that I've crafted my website, the way that my headshots look, all those kinds of things would not be appropriate for any of the 3 of you, because that's uniquely how I coach and what I bring to it. But I know that it's right for me. And like Charlie said, I do feel confident. And you see the same thing reflected in my LinkedIn profile, which is it's fairly conversational, right? It's fairly direct. My mom has a very small dog that barks a lot. Right. But we need to know that about ourselves. So if I go back to this idea, pairing up with what Charlie was saying about representing ourselves in a meaningful way and really embodying our version of success, whatever that looks like, we want that reflected in the text as well. The headshot is really important. It really is. I see a lot of people who have like a selfie that they've cropped and you can kind of tell there's somebody next to them, and it might be a nice picture, but it doesn't really embody where they're going and that story of who they're trying to attract or what kind of job they're trying to attract, right? It tells a story of like, I was having a nice time that evening. We can do better, right? We can do better. And it really is worth, paying Charlie or somebody like Charlie, if you're not in Christiansburg or the area, to take a nice headshot that really represents you as a professional and take that time. Carol has a great headshot. And Carol, I was looking at it this morning in your newsletter. You had your hair done, you've got a nice shirt on, you're smiling, it's just a really nice representation of you. And that's what we want to see on there. That is one of those ways that we start to build trust. The other way that we start to build trust on LinkedIn and these kinds of platforms is by the language that we use. I tend to think that, especially online, the way that authenticity really has a lot to do with consistency, right? So if I read your LinkedIn profile and then I call you because I've gotten interested about what you're saying and I'm curious about hiring you, the person I talk to, I want to make sense in conjunction with what I've read on that LinkedIn profile. And if we live in the same town and I run into you at a party or the grocery store, I'm going to expect a different version of you, of course, but still in alignment, right? Always in alignment. There's going to be different layers. I think of it as circles within circles. And if that biggest circle is all of who we are, we don't need to give that on LinkedIn. We don't need to give that to most of or any of our professional contacts. But we want what we give them to be within that biggest circle and not some weird thing that we've created over here. Okay.
I've heard, just as an aside, I've heard that people will probably see you online first. And because that's what they believe, if you appear differently in person, they don't believe it's you. It's sort of like, this is who Sarah is. And if you show up differently, so that I think that consistency and alignment is really important.
Yeah, I do too. And on some level, we are all in businesses and careers that require trust. We don't get the job or the promotion if people don't feel like they can trust us. We don't get the client if there's not that visceral sense of trust. And I think that also gets back to that idea of a great headshot, where people are getting that sense of your essence and that visceral sense of trust. And then when we have copy, when we have content in there that aligns with that, it reinforces it, especially if our copy in some way sends the message, I see you and I understand what you value, right? I understand what it is that you either fear or hope for or both, right? And I'm here to support you on that. So speaking of which, on LinkedIn, we've got, we have a headshot area. In fact, let me just pull that up. If I can get to the right screen. So we really have two audiences on LinkedIn. One audience is two big audiences. We have lots and lots and lots of audiences, but two big audiences. One, of course, is human beings who go on our profiles and look at them. The other one is the LinkedIn algorithm. And so I want to tell you just a little tiny bit about the algorithm so that you know what to prioritize. But for most of us, people aren't going to do, especially the kinds of work that the six of us do. Most people aren't going to be randomly searching for a photographer, for example, or a public speaker, Carter, but rather they're going to have had some exposure to you, and then they're going to go on LinkedIn to reinforce what they've learned there, just because we're all in fields that are pretty broad with a lot of competition and vague keywords, frankly. But it's all still worth paying attention to. So let me pull up my profile. Ta-da! Okay. So you can see I have this lovely headshot, not by Charlie, but he has done headshots for me before that are fantastic. And then I used a picture someone took of me at a speaking engagement. It's not my favorite picture ever, but I'll update it one day. I'll hire Charlie next time I have an awesome speaking gig. But so these are ways that I sort of reinforce. Yes, I'm a coach. You can see here that I speak. I'm in front of a room of people. I've got a huge PowerPoint behind me. there's a little hint of one of my tattoos here, and I'm wearing these really weird earrings, and I have my really weird hair. So that's one of those ways that I say, hey, this is who I am. And this is who I am as a professional. This is who I am 24/7, you know? And if that's appealing to you, awesome. If it's not, that's okay. This part of our profile here is our title. And this is one of the pieces of information that the algorithm likes the most. And it also sets our human audience up to understand who we are and what we're doing here. Okay. And I think that's important to pay attention to. Now, you know, with coaching, and again, with the work that all 6 of us do here, you know, thinking about keywords, knowing that our primary keywords are fairly competitive, which is to say that a lot of people are using them, and it's probably not going to be as relevant in terms of helping people find us through the algorithm as it is going to be informing our human audience. And so how can you utilize that space in a way that's meaningful and sets people up to understand what you're doing? So you can see I use the word coaching, and then I decided to switch it up. It used to say, until the other day, it said business, career, and empowerment coaching, which is true. But I didn't find that to be dynamic, frankly. And so I instead decided to use some branding, and I talk about bigger lives and better businesses. And so I put that there, and I am pleased with that. Please do, you can see there's a contact info place. Please do have your contact info there. The contact info that's meaningful to you. Frankly, I should probably take Twitter off of there because I almost never go on Twitter. You can also see that my LinkedIn URL is just linkedin.com/n/Sarah B. Ross. If your LinkedIn has alphanumeric at the end of it, just Google how to edit your LinkedIn URL, and actually I can show you that because that happens right over here. Edit public profile and URL, and then you can clean it up. It's very easy. Once you click that button, you can clean it up and make it customized and more meaningful. But I'm not going to get deep into the weeds of which buttons to push because we got bigger fish to fry today. Okay. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. That part, of course, nobody else sees. You're seeing my logged in version. You'd see it on yours. The next place that the algorithm really loves is our About section, which used to be our summary and is analogous to the summary on a resume. So the LinkedIn profile, the algorithm really likes this section, and it's it's the first meaty piece of information that someone's going to get about you, and it really is where you get to put your memoir more overtly. So this is where you get to more overtly put, this is the story of the professional that I am and what I'm doing and what that means, okay? For entrepreneurs, this is sort of a nice place to speak directly to our audience, to speak directly to our ideal client. And think about that. Who is my ideal client? What are they afraid of? What are they hopeful for? What would they get from working with me? Again, it's not about which, lenses and cameras Charlie's using. It's about the outcome that they get, a headshot that they feel really confident with and that they feel pleased with putting up there. So make sure you're always taking it to that outcome place, to that results place, to that feeding their needs place. You can see on here that we got a little, I just pointed as though you could see me point where I was pointing. That was fun. Welcome to my office. So there's a little see more link, right? We get the first little chunk of text. In journalism, they call this the upside down triangle, where we've got the triangle of the story, and we want the biggest media stuff up here, and then we can get down into the minutia at the bottom. We want to do the same thing here. Don't feel like you have to lead up, which is how most of us write. Most of us are like, let me tell you this thing and that thing, and then I'm gonna get to the big reveal. Ha ha ha! Right? No. Do the big reveal first, and then you get to give them all the background. Because one, a lot of people just aren't going to click through, and so we want to give them the media stuff first. So in journalism, they do this because a lot of people will only read the first paragraph. Let's assume people are only going to read these first 3 lines, and that we've really got them engaged by the time, if and when they're going to click that see more. Okay. There's very little editing that's allowed in LinkedIn, so you have to be a little bit playful with that, but don't get too uptight about it. Now, if you are interested in playing with keywords, a lot of people will put down here at the very bottom, they'll do like a little block of keywords, and that's a fine thing to do, okay, to play with. It could give people some more context, and it certainly gives the algorithm some more food, okay? So we're going to continue all of that. I'm going to skip articles and activities and come back to that in a minute. But we're going to continue all of this with our experience. So things to ask yourself when you're deciding what experience to include and what you want to say about it are, is this relevant to the story of my memoir of my career? Is this, relevant to where I'm going and who I'm talking to? And if the answer is yes to that, then what is it about this that makes it relevant? What is it about this piece of my career that illustrates why I'm the person to do the next thing? So for example, my mom is the age coach now. She's coaching people experiencing issues of aging or supporting those who are supporting those who are supporting people experiencing issues of aging. You say that better than I do, I'm sure. And before becoming a coach, she was in academia for a very long time. For majority of your career, all of your career? Yeah. And so shaping that message, finding the transferable skills. So these are the parts of academia that are meaningful to my role as a coach. I learned how to learn. I learned how to be analytical. I learned how to collaborate. I learned how to see a variety of perspectives instead of getting attached to just one perspective. There's certainly a lot of perspectives to be had in universities, right? And I don't even know if I'm hitting on the right things, Mom, but that's sort of what I'm imagining, right? When we think, okay, what's transferable about this? Knowing that a lot of us have very diverse careers. For a lot of us, there's not one linear, very obvious path from where we've been to where we are. And yet there's a thread, and the thread might be about us and what we value and what we bring to the table. And by all means, let's highlight that. Okay, so that made these decisions for me. Of course, education we want to have, that's valuable and important, and additional training. Volunteer experience, especially if it reinforces what you're doing now, though even volunteer work that just sort of illustrates who you are as a person is nice to put. And then we have the skills and endorsements. Now, I tell you, the skills thing is less prominent than it once was because it got kind of spammy. People, they're like, is Sarah good at, underwater acrobatics? And people be like, sure, LinkedIn, yeah. And like, no, there is, no medium in which I am good at acrobatics, but people would hit the button, right? And so that's been de-emphasized because they were seeing that really wasn't playing out. Our recommendations, however, continue to be really valuable. So by all means, ask people to give recommendations. Be bold. You might even say, would you be willing to speak to X, Y, and Z skill? You might start by writing them a recommendation if you're at liberty to do so. Okay. And if you hit this ask for a recommendation button, it's going to walk you through a little process where you can reach out to people directly and make it super duper easy. And then we have
Carter, I have a question about recommendations.
Okay. Lay it on us.
So I had heard once before someone said it's really not a good thing for you to be recommending each other, that for some reason either someone will figure that out, or in the when LinkedIn looks at this, they go, you're just lying about each other for the good, for your own good. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think if all of your recommendations were back and forth, or they weren't substantive in some way, I could definitely see that being a red flag. Like, I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back. I think it would be a little bit strange, frankly, for somebody to have. Okay, I was thinking about scenarios. So for example, if one of my clients gave me a recommendation and I wrote them a recommendation back, that would be a little weird. I have nothing to, it would be a little bit strange for me to endorse my client. But in a, yeah, Charlie?
Well, I was curious. Years ago, when I first joined LinkedIn, I would get I'm not going to say request for recommendations, but something would pop up and they'd say, well, John Smith, you're connected with him. Would you recommend him for videography? Would you recommend
That
him
was
for
this
public
part.
speaking?
That's the skills part.
Well, I don't get any of those anymore.
Well, that's what I was just saying. They've been de-emphasized because they realized that people will press whatever button and it wasn't a meaningful way to acknowledge one another. So they still exist on people's pages, but LinkedIn recognized that it just wasn't getting anybody anywhere. Because like I said, people would hit any button. Underwater basket weaving. Absolutely, Charlie's great at that. Like, no, I don't know what my underwater thing
You
is.
mean people would lie on the internet?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I would say they would be thoughtless sometimes on the internet. They would be so eager, Charlie, to be helpful that they would sometimes not evaluate their statement fully. How's that? But let me go back to the recommendations for a second. If they are thoughtful recommendations, go forth. You know, Carter, I know you well enough to know you're not going to try to scam LinkedIn. But if a coworker gives you a recommendation and they were legitimately a good coworker and you gave them a recommendation back, that's just honest. So I wouldn't let the algorithmic part hold you back from seeking out those recommendations. Okay, so I want to go back. One other thing, interests. Everybody sees your interests, which is actually what I was going to go back to in the article. So this is a good segue. So this is relevant. On all social media, it's fairly easy to see everything that people are doing. It is 10 times easier to see on LinkedIn. If you like something, everybody in your network and everybody in the network of the person whose post you liked has a chance to see that very, very easily and directly. Okay? Your interests are listed right here on your profile. Okay? So there are some of my interests. That's my alma mater. University of North Carolina at Greensboro is also my mother's alma mater and her former workplace. Go Spartans? Is it Spartans? Spartans. I didn't go to any sports ball while I was there. So when I come back to articles and activities, this is another place where I can show you that everything that I do on LinkedIn shows up here. I commented on this post. I commented on this one. If I go to see all activity, you can see all the things that I've liked. Hey, I like Charlie's post, right? So be thoughtful, please be discerning about what you do on LinkedIn and make sure that it all is relevant in some way or another, or at least doesn't contradict your mission and what you're doing here. It's also one of the ways that I evaluate LinkedIn connection requests from people I don't know. I go look at their activities and I ask myself, does this feel relevant to me in some way? One time I did that. This fella sent me a connection request. Sure, I'll go check your stuff out. I looked at his activities. Every single post he interacted with, I am not kidding you, involved some sort of picture of a female bodybuilder. I didn't even know that existed on LinkedIn. And I thought, no, I'm not going to connect with you. Right? So again, we're telling a story here. Let's make sure it's a cohesive story. Let's make sure it's an honest story. Let's make sure it's a cohesive and professional story. Okay? Now, the flip side of this is that when I like Charlie's post, one, it appears in this part of my profile. It appears on my timeline. So any one of you could go look at your homepage of all of the articles coming through to you. And you might well see Sarah liked this post, whether you're connected to Charlie or not. It's going to show up on your timeline. Let's see if I can find an example real quick. Okay, so I don't follow Sword.com, but Mitch Miles, who I am apparently connected with, does. And so I'm seeing Sword.com. Let's see if I can find, oh, that's my sister. Okay, so, I probably am connected to Julio. Yeah, I am. You can tell because it's the first degree connection. But this is showing up on my timeline right now because Charlie liked it. Okay? The reason I wanted to point this out to you is because, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but you'll digest it later and you'll send me emails. It'll be fun. So the reason I want to point this out to you is because this is sort of the flip side of LinkedIn. So we talked about how are we presenting ourselves, right? But also how are we interacting with other people? Okay? And so if I want to be supportive of Carol. I can look for Carol's posts on LinkedIn. I can make sure that I like them. I could post a meaningful comment. It's going to make me a little bit more visible. Perhaps Carol's network will see me, so that's nice for me. But it also makes Carol more visible because then my network is going to see her. And so this is the way that we can amplify other people on LinkedIn. This is a way we can use LinkedIn to give each other the gift of amplification and visibility. And this is a way that we can build relationships on LinkedIn in a very subtle way, right? We need repetition of exposure for any relationship. Networking is not the moment that you press the button to connect with somebody, right? Pressing the button to connect with someone is a way to say, I would like to initiate this relationship. Or if you met them somewhere else, it's a way of saying, I would like to deepen this relationship. But pressing the button is not networking, okay? Receiving the connection request is not networking. But commenting on their posts, sending them a message through LinkedIn or elsewhere, inviting them to coffee, right? That's networking, and that's relationship building, right? And so that's one of the reasons I like LinkedIn, because I can reinforce relationships that I'm building elsewhere very seamlessly, right? I see Charlie for breakfast once a month, every so often with a group of people. Every so often we have coffee or lunch, just the two of us. And then I get to come on here and I get to say, hey, Charlie, I'm still thinking about you. I pressed your, I liked your post, and I'm helping to illuminate you in that way. I'm helping other people to find you in that way. Let me breathe for a moment and ask you if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns at this point. Charlie.
Are you a premium paid member of LinkedIn or a freeloader like me?
Great question. I am not. That stuff is expensive, and they just doubled their prices, as I understand it. I think there's probably real value to having a premium account and utilizing the free month to explore it and see if it's meaningful for you. It never hurts. But for the way but I feel like I get enough value out of LinkedIn without paying. I think it's like $60 a month now. It's incredible. Carol, are you a premium member?
No, but I was just investigating it to consider doing that, to be able to get to the audience, because there is a limit on the number of profiles you can browse. So when I was trying to do this for my class the first time around, I hit that limit and figured out that if I paid, I could get past that. I didn't end up doing it at that moment, but I have considered it.
It's a pretty serious investment.
Yeah.
Are you on ProFinder?
I was for a minute and I got back off it.
Yeah, I had a problem with ProFinder. As a photographer, I thought it would be a good thing. So I joined it, but I haven't paid him anything because I don't want to pay him. Because what they did was when somebody looking for a headshot in Roanoke, Virginia, and I'm supposed to go and reply to that, they would not let me list a price for a headshot of less than $100. And I have many options less than $100 if you come to the studio. And I thought that was ridiculous that they were setting my price. So I would put in hey, LinkedIn only wants me to tell you it's $100, but it's really $45 if you just want a digital thing, this sort of thing. And over the months and stuff, I have gotten no ProFinder requests from anybody within driving distance of Christiansburg, but I see dozens of ProFinder requests from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It makes me want to maybe pack up and leave and go down there, but I just found that kind of ridiculous that they set my price for me for that kind of photography. And
that is strange. I hadn't seen that. My beef with ProFinder. So ProFinder, if you're not familiar with it, people can search for pros. So for example, I was listed as a coach, and then people would send out basically an RFP saying they're looking for a coach for X, Y, and Z reason. And they could accept, and I wasn't paying for that either, so I'm not sure how the dynamic changes, but with the free level, these people could accept 5 RFPs, which would happen almost instantaneously. So you had to be like just on it and ready to go. And there was a limited number that you could respond to. And it was just too frenetic for me to keep up with in daily life. I'm not even an advocate for productivity purposes. I'm not an advocate of staying on email or staying on top of alerts or things like that. I think it's just very distracting and problematic. So I would imagine people who are really up on things like that could get some value out of that, but not, I found it just too little value, too much stuff. Okay. So the one other thing I wanted to make sure, because we could talk about LinkedIn for, all day, but the one other thing that I wanted to make sure to say to you was, and I'm not sure I can get to a good example of this right now, but in fact, I'm going to end the share. Well, I'll leave it for a moment. But what I wanted to say was to be sure that when you're sending a connection request, when you're reaching out to somebody, whether you know them or not, and it's a fine idea to send requests to people you don't know if you feel like they would be meaningful connections for you in some way. If there's somebody that you want to build a relationship with, by all means, that's part of the value of LinkedIn. But when you do, whether you know the person or not, be sure to use the note functionality. There's an option when you send a connection request to add a personalized note. Always do it. 100% of the time. Okay, if they're not somebody that you know, give them a little bit of context. It's a short message. You get a little bit more than you get in a tweet. I think you get like 300 characters or something like that. It's a short little message. So writing some boilerplate so you have, an idea of what you want to say could save you some time in the long run, as long as you consider an update as needed. But give a little context, let them know that you're a real person. A lot of people do treat LinkedIn like Twitter or Facebook, and they're just collecting everybody. It's not valuable. Be thoughtful about who you're connecting with and let them know that you're being thoughtful by adding that little message. If there's somebody you do know, that's a great time to say, hey, it was great to see you at lunch last week, or it's been too long since we've had lunch, or hope everything's going great at the new job, or whatever. Right? Go ahead and add that warmth. Do the relationship building. Don't miss an opportunity to build relationship and to deepen relationships. Alternately, when you decide to connect with somebody who you don't know, so someone sends you a connection request, my routine is that as I said, I look at their profile. I ask myself, is there a reason, do I see a reason to be connected with this person? Maybe they're travel in a circle that I'd like to travel in, or that I am traveling in. Maybe they seem compatible professionally in some way. Maybe they've included a nice note and I think, oh, well, that's really lovely. But when I connect with somebody I don't know in particular, I follow up with a message and I say, hey, thanks for reaching out to connect with me. I'd love to know what inspired you to reach out. Is there a way I could be helpful to you these days? Right? And sometimes people don't respond to that. I actually had one person send me a really angry response. I mean, once in, however many years I've been on this thing. She's like, I'm just trying to get a connection. I don't know why you're grilling me. I'm like, oh, I was just trying to get a combo going. But for the most part, people respond really well or not at all. Right? And that does give me a chance to start building a relationship and make it an actual relationship, an actual connection, instead of just buttons that were pressed and somebody adding to their connection tally and me, right? Okay. So as I said, we could do a lot more, but I hope that I can figure out how to unshare first off. I may not be able to. I used to know how. Any, while I'm pressing buttons, any other questions or thoughts?
This has been very helpful for me. Thank you.
Oh, great. Oh, I see it up here. I did it. I found the button.
I need to go back and yay.
Yay!
I've been back and forth with LinkedIn for years because quite frankly, sometimes I didn't find any value in it. And I get kind of frustrated with, I don't know why I'm always seeing things about Richard Branson. I will never have that level of success that I'm not going to be sending people to the moon or in outer space or whatever. But I do enjoy the connections I have local, because it's not very likely that somebody in California or Minnesota is going to walk into my studio, though that did happen once. Some people from Minnesota came in. And
Random.
well, I have to tell you why they were here, which was kind of unfortunate. If you're familiar with what's going on in Southwest Virginia and the Mountain Valley Pipeline, there's people that want to build a pipeline and there's people that say we don't want to build a pipeline. And it's quite divisive, and I won't get into pros and cons, but
Today's not the day, my man.
okay. Well, he was here because he is a pipeline welder.
Oh.
And that's why he was here. And all I could do was wish him well and take his photo that he wanted. So.
And tell him to speak discreetly in public. You just don't know who you're talking near. Yeah, so, there's just, and I think that that's relevant too, though, Charlie, in that we need to know who our audience is, right? And you work with a distinctly local audience. The rest of us have a little more geographic breadth in what we do. And so knowing that too, as you're evaluating who you're connecting with and who you're accepting connection requests with and how you're languaging, I think is also really valuable. So, number one, though, keep crafting that story. Okay, keep crafting that story, make it relevant. Yes, Dr. Greenberg. You're muted.
Unmute.
There you go.
So one thing I noticed, because I actually started to be active on LinkedIn, is a cautionary tale for me, is it means it's one more thing I have to be paying attention to. And somebody meaningful in terms of my work sent me a message on LinkedIn. It wasn't my habit to look at it. It sat there until I bumped into it by accident. So for me, it means being aware that I have more places I have to stay in touch with. I have to check.
Yeah, that is true. And you might check your notification settings. Are you getting an email when you get something meaningful happening on LinkedIn? I do, I try to keep my apps fairly minimal, but I do keep my LinkedIn app on my phone so that I'm remembering to check that. So thank you. That's a really wise thing to add. And I would encourage you to think about the flip side of that too, which is that if you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and you don't get a response in a short amount of time, make your default assumption that they're not paying attention to LinkedIn. A lot of people don't. And then go check one more thing, and then go check their contact information and see if they have an email address in there and reach out to them another way. But many of us are very adept at ignoring LinkedIn. What's up, Charlie?
Well, I was going to say LinkedIn is a platform that I really don't go to, but maybe once or twice a week. Mm-hmm. But in the past couple months, I've realized that if I don't do something more often, then it's not going to be a beneficial platform for me to be on. I know a photographer who he strictly does products. I mean, all he does is, okay, send me your coffee cups and I'll photograph. He doesn't do people. And every day for several years, he just posted another picture of a product. And now he has people from all over the world sending him products to photograph. I mean, he's very good at what he does. But I mean, we're talking a potato chip company from Japan sends him bags of potato chips.
That's awesome.
And it's mind-boggling to me, but boy, he does a good potato chip photograph.
It's a skill like any other, right? Potato chips just don't naturally look good, even if they taste wonderful. Yeah, so that's a great point too, which is and we could do, again, a whole nother hour just on what we post and how we post and when we post and all those things. But the short version is that each and every one of us are reading content regularly that's relevant to our work. That's great stuff to post. Add a couple of sentences about what was meaningful to you about that article or what you disagreed with. That's perfectly fine. to disagree with an article that you post. I would have tweaked this thing. I appreciate what they said here, but I would have changed, but when I think about this part, this is the direction I would have gone, right? Not in a mean way, just in a like, let's get conversation going way. Or I really love this part of this article. I think we could all use, paying attention to that. Or I thought you might find this helpful, right? But add a little commentary. Just don't post it without any of your own commentary. And absolutely, if you're writing, if you've got a blog, if you write an article that's published somewhere, someone writes an article about you, put all of that on there, please. Anything that reinforces the story, right? The memoir story of why you're the right person for the thing. Ma'am?
Is there a problem unfriending, or I don't know what it's called, unconnecting in LinkedIn? Like if you just happen to have gone on LinkedIn and randomly anybody who looked like they might be in your, and you ask to connect with them, and now you really have people you don't need, aren't the right contact.
The likelihood that somebody would notice that you had like disconnected from them is really slim. And so the question to ask yourself when you're thinking about making a decision like that is what is their network, and am I losing anything by severing that connection? Or am I just refining my network? Yeah. But I wouldn't worry about it. You're not likely to stop getting invited to parties or anything. All right, my friends, anything else before we wrap up today? Okay, well, thank you so much. Please don't hesitate to send me questions or concerns or messages. If you want to follow up on anything, I'd love to hear from you, and perhaps that'll turn into another one of these sessions. Oh, but let's take I'm going to stop the recording